Before the video begins, please consider downloading the free pre-filled notes guide to follow and fill in as the video plays. It can be downloaded by selecting the link located in the description details. Welcome to the 6th installment of the End Time Study series, Is This the End? If you have not watched the first 5 episodes, please consider watching those first. Please allow me to share a few disclaimers before we begin this segment. First, the goal here is not to convince others to believe what I believe. It is, however, to share the importance of Bible prophecy, and to encourage others to think and be prepared for the end times. Next, information shared throughout this video contain ideas and interpretations based on my studies and should not be viewed as 100% accurate. Please study and verify everything you watch and read, including this video. Finally, we must always be careful to not allow man's doctrine to supersede Scripture, nor should we allow our own biases or preconceived beliefs to fog the lens through which we should be reading, studying, and interpreting Scripture. Our future could depend on it. We're reminded of this in Isaiah 29 verse 13, which says, "And Yahweh said, Because this people come near to me with their mouths, and give honor to me with their lips, but their heart is far from me, and their fear of me is false, a rule given them by the teaching of men." Colossians 2 verse 8 says, "See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Messiah." And 1 Timothy 4 verse 1 says, "Now the Spirit expressly says that in later times some will depart from the faith by devoting themselves to deceitful spirits and teachings of demons." As a reminder, if you would like to be notified when a new video is posted, please subscribe to the channel and then select the bell notification. We are halfway through our study of Daniel, so this is a great time to review what we have learned so far. Chapter 1 opens with Daniel living in captivity in Babylon. Babylon at that time was very powerful, modern, and the center of the world. They had selected well-educated and skilled Israelite children to teach the Chaldean ways and tongue, and who would be able to stand before the king. Their Hebrew names were changed to give them a Babylonian identification. Daniel was given the name Belteshazzar. Also chosen were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, which were given the names Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. When faced with a command of Babylon to eat meat they considered unclean, or possibly may have been sacrificed to idols, they requested to eat only vegetables, proving faithful to Yahweh and the healthier alternative. The king found that in every matter inquired of them, they were 10 times better than all the others in his kingdom. In Daniel 2, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. As he had forgot the dream, however remembered it troubled him, Nebuchadnezzar required the magicians, astrologers, sorcerers, and Chaldeans to share the dream and its interpretation, otherwise they and their family would be torn limb from limb. The Chaldeans told the king that no man upon the earth could know the dreams, infuriating Nebuchadnezzar, so he commanded all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. Daniel requested time to pray to his Elohim, and was provided with the dream and the interpretation, and Daniel blessed the Elohim of heaven. Daniel shares the dream that Nebuchadnezzar saw a statue with a head of gold, chest of silver, waist of brass, legs of iron, and feet of iron and clay. A stone not cut out from hands, was cast down from heaven and struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, breaking them in pieces. It became like the chaff, and the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar that he is identified as the head of gold. The next kingdom to arise will be inferior to Babylon, as will the next. Finally, there will come a 4th kingdom. This kingdom will be strong as iron, and will crush and break all the others. Finally, the feet and toes of mixed clay and iron will be a divided kingdom. At that time, the final empire, symbolized as a stone, will smash them all to bits. In chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar forgot Elohim, and had a 90-foot tall image of gold made, and required all to fall down and worship it. Those who didn't would be cast into a fiery furnace. Some of the Chaldeans came forward and accused Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego of not following the decree. Nebuchadnezzar was infuriated at what he heard and had Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego cast into the furnace. While they were in the furnace, Nebuchadnezzar looked inside, and saw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and one like the son of Elohim in the furnace. Yah had protected them while they were in the fire. The chapter ends with Nebuchadnezzar promoting them and blessing the Elohim of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, making a decree that no one should speak anything against their Elohim, or they would be cut in pieces. In chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar has yet another dream. This time the king gives the magicians, astrologers, sorcerers, and Chaldeans the dream, and they still could not give the interpretation, exposing them yet again as counterfeits. Daniel does however interpret the dream for Nebuchadnezzar. In this dream, Nebuchadnezzar dreams he is a giant tree that reaches to heaven. As the tree, he provides food and shelter to all the birds of the sky and beasts of the field. The tree is the strong king and the animals are his subjects. The interpretation shares the tree is Nebuchadnezzar, but judgment would come upon the king. This is symbolized by the tree being completely damaged, leaving only the stump, which represents Nebuchadnezzar being like the beasts of the field for a period of time. 12 months later, Nebuchadnezzar in his pride, exalts himself instead of giving all the glory to Elohim, and immediately is punished. He is transformed into a beast for 7 periods of time. 7 is a number of completeness, and at the end of this period of time, we see Nebuchadnezzar return to his understanding, praising and honoring the King of Heaven, completing his punishment. Chapter 5 picks up years later, when Belshazzar, Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, is now ruling. While holding a feast, Belshazzar commanded to have the golden and silver vessels that had been taken from the temple in Jerusalem, brought to him, so his royal party could drink out of them. That same hour, the king saw a finger of a man's hand, the finger of Elohim, right on the wall. Again, the magicians and enchanters could not read or interpret what was seen, however Daniel could. He read the writing which said, Mene, Mene, Tekel, and Parsin. He then followed with the interpretation which pronounced judgment on Belshazzar and Babylon. Daniel said as Belshazzar had desecrated the holy vessels, Babylon would be captured and overtaken. That night, Belshazzar was murdered and Darius the Mede took the kingdom. In chapter 6, Daniel is serving King Darius as one of 3 presidents over his entire kingdom. Darius also set up satraps to report into the 3 presidents. These satraps and other presidents tricked Darius into signing a decree. This decree said that whoever petitions of any god or man for 30 days, other than the king, should be cast into a den of lions. 3 times daily, Daniel prayed toward Jerusalem from opened windows in the upper chamber of his house. The satraps and other 2 presidents knew this and when caught, reminded the king that he had made the decree, and he sorrowfully had Daniel cast into the lion's den. The next morning, Darius saw Daniel's Elohim had saved him, and had him removed from the den. The king then commanded that those men that had deceived him be cast into the den of lions, along with their wives and children. Darius then issued a new decree that men are to tremble and fear before Daniel's Elohim. Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius the Mede and of Cyrus the Persian. We see many shifts at chapter 6 and 7. Before we begin our in-depth look of chapter 7, let's review these shifts. First, the book of Daniel was reportedly written in 2 languages. Chapter 1 was written in Hebrew, most likely to give an account of the first 3 years of Daniel's education in Babylon. Chapters 2 to 7 were written in Aramaic while chapters 8 to 12 were written in Hebrew. Let's look at some possible ideas for writing in 2 languages. One idea is that both languages were used because they were both used in the region at the time. Another idea is that the entire book was originally written in Aramaic, however needed to be translated into Hebrew. A third idea is that the entire book was originally written in Hebrew, but lost, and only the Aramaic translations were preserved. Then there is the idea that the Hebrew was written for those in academia, while the Aramaic was written for the layperson. Others believe that as Aramaic was their exile language, certain parts could have been written in Hebrew to hide details. A final idea is that those chapters written in Aramaic were written in Babylon, while those chapters written in Hebrew were written in Israel, after the captivity in Babylon was over. One thing is sure, there is also strong support that the audience for the latter half of Daniel appears to be Jewish, as the Tetragrammaton, YHWH or the Lord, is mentioned 7 times. We also see these very same chapters look to be written to separate groups. Outside chapter 1 being an introduction to the rest of the book, chapters 2 to 7 are written about Gentile nations, while chapters 8 to 12 are written about the Hebrew nation. Next, the interpretation types are separated as well. Chapters 1 to 6 contain dreams in which Daniel interprets, telling the future history of many nations to come. Meanwhile, chapters 7 to 12 contain dreams in which an angel shares the interpretation, telling visions of apocalyptic nature. Then, we see that these chapters are placed into 2 groups. Chapters 1 to 6 are primarily foretelling of historical visions which will happen in the near future, or approximately 600 years. Chapters 7 to 12 are primarily prophecy of apocalyptic visions still yet to be fulfilled. Finally, back in the Daniel chapters 1 and 2 video, we covered a chiasm scene in chapters 2 to 7. As a reminder, a chiasm is used in literature in which a sequence of ideas is initially presented and then repeated in reverse order. To recap, chapter 1 begins with an introduction. Chapter 2 covers kingdom rule. We see these kingdoms rule through the fulfillment of Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the statue with the head of gold, chest and arms of silver, waist and thighs of brass, legs of iron, and feet and toes mixed of iron and clay. The head of gold, of course, was Babylon. They were captured by Medo-Persia, which was the chest and arms of silver. Next, the Medes and Persians were captured by Greece, represented by the waist and thighs of brass. Then, Greece was captured by Rome, represented by the legs of iron. Finally, a final kingdom will arise, represented by the feet and toes mixed of iron and clay. In chapter 3, tribulation and testing by a Gentile power takes place. Tribulation and testing can be seen when Nebuchadnezzar has a 90-foot-tall golden statue erected, and everyone was required to bow down to it or be cast into a fiery furnace. We see here that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were kept from harm, yet those who planned evil against them were not. Chapter 4 then shares about divine deliverance by an angel or angels. We see this, when a year after his dream of the tree being chopped down, Nebuchadnezzar spoke prideful of himself. Immediately afterwards, a voice from heaven spoke saying the kingdom had departed from him, and that he shall be driven out, become like a beast while living among them, eating grass like an ox for 7 periods. At this point the chiasm's reverse order begins. Chapter 5 also shares about divine deliverance by an angel or angels. This is seen by the handwriting on the wall that when interpreted, told of the demise of Belshazzar and the end of Babylon. In chapter 6, again tribulation and testing by a Gentile power takes place. We see this tribulation and testing in that if anyone worshipped any other gods but Darius, they should be cast into a den of lions. Similar to chapter 3, we see Daniel was kept from any harm when cast into the den of lions while those who were evil, were not. And in chapter 7, kingdom rule is covered again. We see these as Daniel's vision is interpreted as the 4 beasts representing the same kingdoms as in chapter 2, which are Babylon, then Medo-Persia, then Greece, and ending with Rome. We recap the chiasm in chapters 2 to 7 because we see this very same chiasm in the latter half of Daniel as well. First, we see that chapter 7 covers kingdom rule. We can see these kingdoms in the interpretation of Daniel's dream of the 4 beasts, which were the lion, the bear, the leopard, and the terrifying beast with iron teeth. Next in chapter 8, tribulation and testing by a Gentile power takes place. We see this when a man will be given great power and shall take control over the earth. He will destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. Chapter 9 shares about divine deliverance by an angel or angels. We see this when Daniel prays for his people and the angel Gabriel came and gave him understanding of the 70-year prophecy. Then we see the chiasm's reverse order begin. Chapter 10 also shares about divine deliverance by an angel or angels. This is seen when the angel came to Daniel after 3 weeks of prayer and fasting and helped Daniel understand what will happen to his people in the latter days. In chapter 11, again tribulation and testing by a Gentile power takes place. We see this tribulation and testing in verses 33 to 35, which say, "And the wise among the people shall make many understand, though for some days they shall stumble by sword and flame, by captivity and plunder. When they stumble, they shall receive a little help. And many shall join themselves to them with flattery, and some of the wise shall stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made white, until the time of the end, for it still awaits the appointed time." Finally, in chapter 12, kingdom rule is covered again. We see kingdom rule here, however this time it is in reference to the millennial reign on earth and the eternal reign. When we combine these 5 details together, we see a clear pattern. Chapters 2 to 7 are written in Aramaic and chapters 8 to 12 are written in Hebrew. Chapters 2 to 7 are written about Gentile nations, while chapters 8 to 12 are written about the Hebrew nation. Chapters 2 to 6 contain dreams Daniel interprets, however chapters 7 to 12 contain dreams interpreted by an angel. Chapters 2 to 6 are historical visions that happened within 600 or so years, and chapters 7 to 12, while historical in some areas, contains dual interpretations that are future apocalyptic visions. Chapters 2 to 7 contain details which support chiasm number 1, and chapters 7 to 12 contain details which support chiasm number 2. Again, we see continued support that Yah is an Elohim of patterns and numbers. Now that we have seen how Daniel 7 is the primary splitting point within the book, let's begin our study of chapter 7. Chapter 7 expounds upon chapter 2's dream and interpretation of the large statue made of gold, silver, brass, iron and clay mixed. As this chapter contains quite a few references to future prophecy, we'll review it verse by verse. Let's begin. Daniel 7 verse 1 says, "In the first year of Belshazzar king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay in his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter." In verse 1, a vision came to Daniel during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar's son, Belshazzar. We saw in chapter 6 that after Belshazzar saw the writing on the wall and Daniel interpreted the writing, that the Babylonian Empire was conquered by Darius the Mede of the Medo-Persian Empire. Therefore, chapter 7 contains details of Daniel's dream, which he had prior to the events which take place in chapter 6. Daniel 7 verse 2 says, "Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea." Winds are sometimes seen as Elohim's sovereign power striving with men. Examples of this can be seen in Isaiah 27 verse 8, which says, "Measure, by exile you contended with them, he removed them with his fierce breath in the day of the east wind." And also Isaiah 41 verse 15b to 16a, says, "You shall thresh the mountains and crush them, and you shall make the hills like chaff, you shall winnow them, and the wind shall carry them away, and the tempest shall scatter them." The sea is sometimes seen as a picture of Gentile nations. An example of this can be seen in Isaiah 57 verse 20, which says, "But the wicked are like the tossing sea, for it cannot be quiet, and its waters toss up mire and dirt." Verse 2 can therefore be seen as a picture of Elohim's sovereign power striving with the Gentile nations, or whole earth. Daniel 7 verse 3 says, "And 4 great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another." Beasts represent empires or kingdoms, and as we saw in verse 2, the sea is sometimes seen as a picture of Gentile nations. Verse 3 therefore shows us that 4 kingdoms will rise up out of Gentile nations. Daniel 7 verse 4 says, "The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then as I looked its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and the mind of a man was given to it. The wings symbolize Nebuchadnezzar's humiliation as his kingdom was plucked from him. The heart of man represents his salvation. This beast is the same as the head of gold of the statue from chapter 2 and therefore represents Babylon, which ruled from 605 to 539 BC. Daniel 7 verse 5 says, "And behold, another beast, a second one, like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, Arise, devour much flesh." The bear raising itself on one side symbolizes that of the 2 kingdoms, Persia was stronger than the Medes, while the 3 ribs symbolize the ancient civilizations before them, Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon. The Medo-Persia armies were so large, they overcame others like a huge bear smothering its victim. This beast is the chest of silver and represents Medo-Persia, which ruled from 539 to 332 BC. Daniel 7 verse 6 says, "After this I looked, and behold, another, like a leopard, with 4 wings of a bird on its back. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it." The leopard symbolizes the swiftness of Alexander the Great taking over. Alexander the Great died in 323 BC at the unexpected age of 32 with no heir to take over the kingdom, so 4 of his generals split his kingdoms into 4 areas, symbolized by the 4 heads. This beast is the waist and thighs of bronze and represents Greece, who ruled from 332 to 63 BC. Daniel 7 verse 7 says, "After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth, it devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. The exceedingly strong beast with great iron teeth and 10 horns symbolizes Rome, who was a mighty kingdom that crushed all its foes. This beast was the iron legs, and feet with iron and clay toes, and represents Rome, who ruled from 63 BC to 476 AD. The prophecies of the 4 beasts in verses 4 to 7 came true hundreds of years after these dreams were interpreted. We'll end here and pick up the next video at verse 8. Thank you so much for viewing this video. I hope you are enjoying this end-time study. If you recall, Revelation begins and ends with a blessing, so please continue studying. Also, I encourage you to be like the Bereans and verify videos and books you watch and read, including this one, to ensure they line up with Scripture. If you enjoyed the video, please like it. Also, please consider subscribing to the channel. My plan is to post a new video every 2 weeks or so, Yah willing. I am so blessed to be able to study Yah's Word and provide what He has shared with me in my studies. I appreciate you watching, and I am so grateful for your prayers and support of this ministry.